On the rain-soaked fields of Waterloo, June 18, 1815, two military giants finally met in battle. Napoleon Bonaparte, the fallen emperor who had escaped exile to reclaim his throne, faced Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, who commanded an allied army standing between France and European dominion. Their confrontation would decide not just the fate of armies, but the future of a continent. The numbers were staggering. 140,000 men, 400 cannons, and thousands of cavalry would clash on a battlefield barely 3 square miles wide. But Waterloo was more than a contest of forces. It was a battle of opposites. Napoleon's aggressive genius against Wellington's steadfast defense, French revolutionary fervor against European monarchical order, personal ambition against collective security. The outcome would reshape Europe. Victory would restore Napoleon's empire and validate his vision of a continent under French leadership. Defeat would end the age of revolutionary conquest and usher in a new international order. As dawn broke over the sodden Belgian countryside, neither commander could know that by nightfall, one of history's most decisive battles would be over, and with it, the destiny of Europe would be forever changed. Their lives had been running in parallel without intersecting, like two great rivers flowing toward an inevitable confluence. Napoleon Bonaparte and Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, were born in the same year, 1769. Yet their paths to Waterloo could hardly have been more different. Their contrasting backgrounds and personalities would shape not just their military strategies, but the fate of Europe itself. Napoleon's rise from obscure Corsican nobility to Emperor of France embodied the revolutionary spirit of his age. A brilliant student of artillery and mathematics, he emerged during the chaos of the French Revolution as a commander who could inspire near-fanatical loyalty. His early campaigns in Italy revealed his distinctive approach to warfare: rapid movement, concentrated force, and an uncanny ability to divide and isolate enemy armies. At Austerlitz in 1805, he demonstrated his mastery of the battlefield, using the morning fog and sun to devastating effect. At Jena Auerstedt in 1806, his dynamic maneuvering crushed the Prussian army. Each victory added to his legend and expanded his empire. Yet Napoleon's genius had its blind spots. His tendency to seek decisive battle sometimes led to reckless decisions. The disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia exposed the limits of his strategy. His Grande Armée of 600,000 men was reduced to barely 30,000 survivors. His refusal to compromise led to his first defeat and exile to Elba in 1814. When he escaped and returned to France in March 1815, he found many of his best marshals either dead or unwilling to join his cause. Still, his presence alone was enough to rally an army of 125,000 veterans and young recruits for one final campaign. Wellington's journey to Waterloo followed a more conventional path, but one no less remarkable in its achievements. Born into the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, he learned his craft in India, where he developed his characteristic defensive style. The campaigns against Maratha Confederacy taught him the importance of logistics, careful positioning, and adapting to terrain. He became master of the reverse slope technique, positioning troops behind ridge lines to shelter them from artillery fire, a tactic he would use to devastating effect at Waterloo. In the Peninsular War, 1808-1814, Wellington systematically dismantled French control of Spain and Portugal. His victories at Salamanca 1812 and Vitoria 1813 revealed his tactical brilliance: patient, methodical, and lethal when striking at the right moment. Unlike Napoleon, who sought to dominate the battlefield through bold maneuver, Wellington excelled at forcing his enemies to attack him on ground of his choosing. "I don't know what effect these men will have upon the enemy," he once remarked of his troops, "but by God, they frighten me." Their differing approaches to warfare reflected deeper contrasts in character. Napoleon was charismatic and bold, willing to accept massive casualties for decisive victory. His presence on the battlefield electrified his men. They called him Le Tendu, the shorn one, with affection, and his appearance before a battle was worth thousands of reinforcements. Wellington was pragmatic and conservative, carefully husbanding his resources and avoiding unnecessary losses. His men respected rather than loved him, calling him the Biscuit for his attention to supply lines and the Peer for his aristocratic bearing. As spring turned to summer in 1815, these two masters of war finally moved toward their encounter. Napoleon's strategy was characteristically aggressive. He aimed to drive a wedge between Wellington's Anglo-Allied army and Blücher's Prussians, defeating them separately before they could combine their forces. He nearly succeeded at Ligny on June 16th, forcing the Prussians to retreat, but failed to destroy their army completely. Wellington, meanwhile, had positioned his forces along the Brussels road, ready to concentrate wherever Napoleon struck. After a preliminary engagement at Quatre Bras, he withdrew to a position he had noted years earlier, the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean near the village of Waterloo. There, on ground of his choosing, with promises of Prussian support, he would make his stand against the greatest soldier of the age. The stage was set for a battle that would match not just armies, but philosophies of warfare and leadership. Napoleon's dynamic aggression would meet Wellington's steadfast defense, and Europe's future hung in the balance. Dawn broke over Waterloo at 4 a.m. on June 18, 1815, revealing a landscape transformed by overnight rain. The wheat fields had become a quagmire, forcing Napoleon to delay his attack. "I need 3 hours for the ground to dry," he told his marshals, a decision that would prove fateful. Each hour of delay increased the likelihood of Blücher's Prussians arriving to reinforce Wellington. Wellington had positioned his army of 68,000 men with characteristic precision. His main line stretched along the Mont Saint-Jean ridge, anchored by 3 fortified positions: the chateau of Hougoumont on the right, the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte in the center, and the hamlets of Papelotte and La Haye on the left. The bulk of his infantry lay hidden behind the ridge crest, sheltered from French artillery fire, a trademark Wellington tactic that had served him well in Spain. The French army of 73,000, despite being larger, faced immediate challenges. The sodden ground meant artillery wheels sank into the mud, while cavalry horses struggled for footing. Napoleon's usual tactic of softening enemy positions with sustained artillery fire would be less effective on this waterlogged battlefield. At 11:30 a.m., a single gun fired from the French lines the signal to begin. Prince Jerome Bonaparte's division advanced toward Hougoumont, intended as a diversionary attack to draw Wellington's reserves to his right. The initial skirmish quickly escalated into a bloody siege that would consume French resources throughout the day. The chateau's defenders, the British Coldstream Guards under Lieutenant Colonel James MacDonell, transformed the building into a fortress. When French troops managed to break through the North Gate, MacDonell personally led a counterattack that became legendary. A handful of guardsmen forced the gate closed, trapping 40 French soldiers inside. All but one were killed in the courtyard. At 1 p.m., Napoleon unleashed the main assault. Marshal Ney led d'Erlon's Freikorps, 16,000 infantry arranged in massive columns against Wellington's left center. French artillery opened a devastating bombardment, but the soft ground absorbed much of the impact. As the columns advanced, they presented perfect targets for British artillery firing canister shot. The attack's climax came when the British heavy cavalry, the Household and Union brigades, launched a devastating countercharge. Led by Lord Uxbridge, these elite horsemen smashed into the French columns, sending them reeling back in disorder. However, the British cavalry, caught up in their success, pursued too far. French lancers and cuirassiers counterattacked, inflicting heavy casualties on the now isolated British horsemen. The battle's turning point centered on La Haye-Sainte. The farmhouse, defended by the King's German Legion, was crucial to Wellington's center. After hours of relentless attacks, the defenders ran out of ammunition. At 6 p.m., French forces finally captured the position, creating a dangerous gap in the Allied line. Marshal Ney, seeing what he believed was a general retreat, actually a disciplined withdrawal of wounded to the rear, launched a massive cavalry attack. Wave after wave of French heavy cavalry, up to 9,000 horsemen, charged the Allied center. Wellington's infantry formed squares, creating islands of bristling bayonets. The scene became apocalyptic. Cavalry circling the squares, unable to break them, while Allied artillery fired into the masses of horsemen at point-blank range. Around 6 p.m., the 1st Prussian Corps under Bülow emerged from the woods of Paris, threatening Napoleon's right flank. The Emperor was forced to commit his reserves to hold Plancenoit village against this new threat, weakening his main effort against Wellington. At 7 p.m., Napoleon played his final card, the Imperial Guard. These elite veterans, who had never known defeat, advanced toward the Allied center in 2 massive columns. Wellington had anticipated this moment. He had quietly reinforced his center with fresh troops, hidden behind the ridge. As the Guard crested the ridge, they met devastating musket fire from British infantry that had moved forward into line. "Now, Maitland, now's your time," Wellington called out. The 1st Foot Guards rose from their concealed position and delivered a point-blank volley. Simultaneously, the 52nd Light Infantry wheeled around and caught the Guard's flank. The moment was decisive. The invincible Imperial Guard wavered, then broke. Seeing the Guard retreat, panic spread through the French army. "La Garde recule!" "The Guard retreats!" became a cry of despair. Wellington seized the moment, symbolically waving his hat in the air, the signal for a general advance. As the Allied army swept forward, the French army disintegrated into a chaotic retreat. Napoleon fled the field, leaving behind his carriage and personal belongings. By nightfall, the French army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Wellington and Blücher met at La Belle Alliance, Napoleon's former headquarters, marking their victory with a historic handshake. The human cost was staggering. 25,000 French and 23,000 Allied casualties lay scattered across the battlefield. The age of Napoleon was over. The day after Waterloo, the battlefield presented a scene of unprecedented carnage. Surgeon James Thompson of the 2nd Life Guards wrote in his diary, "The whole field from right to left was a mass of dead bodies. The sight was too horrible to behold. Local peasants were hired to bury the dead, while army surgeons worked without rest in makeshift hospitals throughout Brussels and the surrounding villages. In the chaos of retreat, the French army lost not only its cohesion but its identity as Europe's premier fighting force. Equipment littered the roads to France, abandoned cannons, ammunition wagons, and even Napoleon's own campaign carriage, captured intact with his personal correspondence and diamond-studded sword. Napoleon himself fled to Paris, arriving on June 21st. He found the political winds had shifted irrevocably against him. The Chamber of Representatives, led by the cunning Joseph Fouché, forced his second abdication on June 22nd. Napoleon's final gambit to escape to America was thwarted by British naval patrols. On July 15th, he surrendered to Captain Frederick Maitland of HMS Bellerophon, perhaps hoping for clemency. Instead, the British government exiled him to St. Helena, a remote volcanic island in the South Atlantic, where he would spend his remaining years writing his memoirs and attempting to shape his legacy. The battle's commanders followed dramatically different trajectories in its wake. Wellington emerged as Britain's greatest military hero since Marlborough. His return to London was marked by unprecedented celebrations, though he himself remained characteristically modest. "Nothing except a battle lost can be half so melancholy as a battle won," he wrote to his sister. Blücher's contribution to the victory was initially undervalued outside Prussia, but his aggressive pursuit of the French army after Waterloo proved crucial in preventing their reorganization. He died in 1819, celebrated as a national hero in Prussia, where his partnership with Wellington became a symbol of Anglo-German cooperation. Waterloo marked the end of an era in warfare, but also pointed toward the future. The battle demonstrated the increasing importance of infantry firepower over cavalry charges, a trend that would accelerate with technological advances. Wellington's defensive tactics, particularly his use of reverse slopes and fortified positions, influenced military thinking well into the 20th century. The battle's scale, over 140,000 men fighting in a space of about 3 square miles, highlighted the growing complexity of military operations. Future commanders studied how Wellington coordinated his multinational force and how Napoleon's traditionally successful tactics failed against a well-prepared defensive position. The Congress of Vienna, interrupted by Napoleon's return, resumed its work of restructuring Europe. Waterloo's outcome reinforced its conservative agenda. The restoration of traditional monarchies and the establishment of a balance of power system that would prevent any single nation from dominating Europe. France faced punitive measures, including war reparations and temporary occupation, but was not dismembered. The victorious Allies, mindful of the mistakes made after Napoleon's first defeat, sought stability over vengeance. Louis XIII returned to the French throne, though the country would struggle with its political identity for decades to come. Britain emerged as the world's dominant power, its naval supremacy unchallenged, and its industrial revolution gathering pace. The next century would become a Pax Britannica, with London at the center of global finance and trade. Waterloo quickly entered the cultural lexicon, inspiring countless books, paintings, and poems. Major William Seiborne's massive diorama of the battle, created in the 1830s using correspondence from survivors, became a sensation in London. The term "to meet one's Waterloo" entered common usage, meaning to face a decisive or crushing defeat. Each nation interpreted the battle through its own lens. In Britain, it became a symbol of national character, steadfast courage against overwhelming odds. In Prussia, it represented the army's rebirth after earlier defeats to Napoleon. The French, despite their defeat, found aspects to celebrate in their army's final display of valor, particularly the Imperial Guard's last stand. The battlefield's transformation began almost immediately. In 1820, Dutch King William I ordered the construction of the Lion's Mound, Butte du Lion, a massive artificial hill topped by a cast-iron lion. While its construction unfortunately destroyed part of the original ridge where Wellington made his stand, it provides visitors with a panoramic view of the battlefield. Modern archaeological work continues to uncover new details about the battle. Metal detectorists have recovered thousands of musket balls, buttons, and personal items, helping to verify or correct historical accounts. Each discovery adds to our understanding of this pivotal moment in European history. Waterloo's significance extends beyond its immediate military outcome. It marked the end of the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic period, 1789 to 1815, a quarter century that transformed European society, politics, and warfare. The battle ushered in a new international order based on cooperation among great powers, rather than hegemony by a single state. The Congress system that emerged after Waterloo attempted to maintain peace through regular meetings of major powers, an early predecessor to modern international organizations. While it ultimately failed to prevent future conflicts, it established important principles of international cooperation. Napoleon's final defeat also crystallized competing visions of Europe's future: revolution versus reaction, nationalism versus internationalism, modernization versus tradition. These tensions would shape European politics throughout the 19th century and beyond. Today, Waterloo remains a powerful symbol of how single battles can alter the course of history. The European Union's headquarters in Brussels lies just miles from where Wellington and Blucher's armies fought to determine Europe's fate. The battle reminds us that European unity, now pursued through peaceful integration, was once contested on the battlefield.